Hi, welcome back. We're at part 2 of Turbulence Today, talking about contemporary models, the VUCA, 4IR, internal trends. I talked about those in part 1. We're going to look at distributed leadership as well and also continue where we left off. So I ended with the idea of leadership goal cross-culturally being as follows here. Stakeholders interacting in suitable ways that they feel calm, confident, and able to work with you. Okay, so if you take that as the starting place, oh, there's global popping up there, okay. Take that as the starting place. The other thing that I think is important to think about, and this came to me as I was working on a book recently, there seem to be 3 really important things that I think about as a global preamble, kind of before you're into the global context. And if you're already in it, taking a step back, if you haven't already thought through these, I think can be very helpful. Self-awareness, knowing yourself. You saw that from the beginning with the article about developing authenticity as a leader. Knowing yourself, understanding what your values are, your styles, your biases, and the assumptions that you hold, the stereotypes that come from your own culture. That's a place where even people who study globally, study and think they become global experts, very often they don't ground their expertise in deep knowledge about their own cultures. They maybe haven't even thought about that specifically. So, what becomes then really interesting also is not just thinking about the national culture, which is the way much of the cross-cultural research and prescriptions are put out, but also thinking about regional differences. In addition to traveling to so many countries, I've lived in many, many different places in the United States. And regional differences, once you begin to tune into them, I mean, knowing those differences can make all the difference in your success or lack thereof. And that's not exclusive to the U.S. Any country that you go to visit, the deeper you get into it, the more experiences you put on the ground and so forth, the better you learn about yourself, basically. Knowing the cross-cultural basics. Variance in the norms, of course, that's standard fare and coming from a cross-cultural perspective as you do officially now at Thunderbird, but also grounding the expectations. So, not accepting because others have told you that's the way it is. That's not necessarily the way it's going to be in your interactions, not necessarily the way it is with the particular people that you interact with and so forth. So constantly pulling the local information, the current, the self information together as you're doing cross-cultural interactions is absolutely essential and will distinguish you from others who have studied the essence of global and the essence of cross-cultural but haven't really taken it in at a very deep level. Continuously learning and improving, that relates to what I was just saying. So strengthening your ability to perceive things, that's the perceptual acuity. So tuning in, listening well, watching carefully, watching for details, watching for background and so forth, keeping an open mind and then revising with the learning that happens, comparing what you see in your day-to-day reality to what you've learned and where there are fits and where they're not, and then readjusting your knowledge accordingly if you have enough experiences that say, gosh, I need to rethink this. Global, our goal primarily when we think about global is to understand difference. So the thing that becomes tricky in the business environment, and again, I'm going to make a real quick reference to crisis situations, to crisis management, it becomes compelling in crisis situations, is that each culture has a dominant profile or values orientation. There's numerous variations, and I talked about that even just in the last slide in terms of thinking about what's the difference in this region, or what's the difference in this particular city, or even in this particular neighborhood, or even with a particular individual I'm interacting with. The thing that's interesting and really challenging is when you're in difficult times in an organization, and at the far end of that, of course, is crisis, you can't predict which is going to take the lead, which will dominate. So even though you know the basic cultural environment where you are operating, and you assume through normal operations that they are adhering to the organizational culture, the values and norms and objectives and so forth that the organization holds dear, when a crisis hits, they may very well go back to their normal, their more deeply rooted normal, and what you're assuming may just go right out of the window. It's the joys of looking at organizational behavior. It's never completely predictable. Okay, some traits that help master cross-cultural, and I love this idea in the previous book that I was mentioning in the first one, Cultural Intelligence. They talk about the issue of coming, I think it's a great metaphor, coming off of autopilot, coming off of cruise control. The CCC stands for Cultural Cruise Control, which I think is a very cool way to think about that. So what does it take to get off of that? And this relates to the slide I just talked about. So when you come into a circumstance and, wow, things aren't fitting the way you expected them to fit, so how do you maneuver yourself and the situation in those kinds of circumstances? So all of these things above the top line, I think we would maybe take for granted if we just thought about it, and I asked you to make a quick list. Some of these I think would hit, adaptability. Again, this idea of being able to watch closely, the perceptual acuity to watch closely, to listen well, all that. Cognitive skills, do you have the smarts to think through what you're seeing and why it might be challenging? Optimism. But what's interesting to me that they offer in this perspective is what hits below the dotted line. And by the way, I just put that dotted line on there. That's not part of theirs. But these to me are things we wouldn't, from a business school perspective in particular, even a global business school, I don't know that we would think about these right away cross-culturally. But humility and empathy and compassion are essential, right? We're essential. We're all human beings. We all want that mutual respect. We want the respect toward us, at least, and hopefully we are also generating the respect toward others. The last two, perhaps even less likely to hit the list, which is courage, right? Because you're stepping out of your comfort zone by definition. When you even if you're not stepping fully into the other culture, which, by the way, is not a good idea, at least until you really know what the other culture is all about. We call that going native, and that can become a problem. But having the courage to even come in to try to meet and figure out what the differences are and how to make them work out, that takes some courage, and it certainly also takes a sense of humor, particularly about oneself. So on the personal development side, thinking about all those things, thinking about how you actually do that, what are the behaviors? So let me hit just a few of these. Critical thinking skills, absolutely, that you're able to identify and challenge your own assumptions. And in this course, we work on that on the personal development side, including relationship skills, so the whole emotional and social intelligence, including self-regulation. So it starts with personal awareness of how you are and what your preferences and values are, and to the extent possible, how you come across to other people. But then also being able to regulate or control that, so it's fitting to the context and fitting to the interaction. Another one, analyzing the lessons after you fail, and then experimenting and paying attention to what the effects are and adjusting, making adjustments on the fly. And then again, if you're seeing patterns there and you've kind of tested the patterns, thinking about how you need to rethink what you take for granted about that particular culture, or that particular setting, or that particular individual. One of the other things, places where I think we miss the mark, at least to the best of my knowledge, even though T-Bird is so far advanced in terms of thinking, in my opinion, and experience in thinking about cross-cultural issues, is that the issues cross-culturally are not just of national origin. And that's where they tend to center in terms of the, sort of in quotes, the domain of cross-cultural research. They tend to look at national origin. They might take indigenous heritage into account as well. Certainly there's another whole discipline that looks at gender differences, but all of these other things, including the ones I just mentioned, also come into play when you're interacting with anybody. And this work and this list, and a source you might want to take a look at if you want to get into this in more depth, a wonderful book by Pamela Hayes that's called Addressing Cultural Complexes in Practice. And she is, I hope I'm getting this right, a social anthropologist, so she knows her stuff from a very different perspective than we take. But I think it's really important when you take these into consideration. It may put the cultural or national cross-cultural issue at a step or a couple steps back in terms of what the influences are. And when I am teaching courses for classes that go overseas to environments that they don't know, I try to press really hard on this point and always have an assignment at the beginning when they get the boots on the ground at the beginning to take a look at a few circumstances and really think how some of these other things could have come into play. So I put it out there as food for thought, as personal development, and so forth. Distributed leadership. So we know when we think about these new models, starting again from the really big social and then or societal and organizational levels, certainly you can't make the changes all by yourself. You're never going to get to perfect or flawless, and time isn't on your side because those things are underway and they're moving so fast, and it's a catch-up game almost always. And here's where Ancona's article comes into play, and this is an assignment for you, so I'm just going to go through these slides almost like they're a video in themselves. So distributed leadership, the main thing I draw to here in the red print, the red font, today's environment again shatters this myth. Like you can't, if you think about just VUCA, if you think about just 4IR, if you think about just the kinds of trends and changes that are happening at the margin in organizations and brought on by external trend changes and so forth, these things don't work, right? I mean, if you try to act like you're confident about something that's going on in a VUCA that's hitting you as VUCA, you could end up letting your organization or your team fall into a crisis situation. So again, I think what she sets out here is really important. I hope you read it and think about it not just at the level where she talks about it at the organizational level, but also really bring it down for you personally. How does the myth affect you? So one way to think about that for self-assessment and reflection, which is fitting to the personal leadership development part of this course. What do you expect from your direct reports? And what's expected of you in your organization in terms, again, of the issues that fall within that leadership myth? And what do you expect of yourself? And that one sometimes can be the most limiting for us. Here's an overall layout of the view that Ancona and her colleagues put forth, looking at 4 key leadership capabilities: visioning, relating, inventing, and sense-making, all of which help you make your own way through how you lead, how you follow, how you adapt, and so forth. And what I'd ask you to do from a self-assessment perspective is think about which is your strongest, or where are your strongest and weakest capabilities, and then also get some feedback from other people. So it's again this idea you're doing some self-appraisal, self-assessment, but you're also going beyond that and getting others' views, whose perspectives of you you would be well put to draw it from people who know you in different ways, not just people you work with, not just people on your team, and so forth. And here are the 4. I'm just going to flip through these so fast. Thinking about all of these, thinking about, where are you on these? Where's your organization on issues of sense making? Where are you within your organization on any one of these? On relating, again, developing key relationships within and across organizations. How do you do on these? Where are there some places on these where you feel like you could do better? And again, get some feedback on that, even just informal lunch or coffee conversation. Visioning, creating a compelling vision for the future. Again, we've got measurables here, certainly things that you can reflect about. You might not have data on them. Make some data, create some data, but also just do some reflection and ask others. And then the final one, creating the processes and structures to make the vision a reality, and that under their model comes in as inventing. So again, think about you within your organization. Here's if you want to print this, I'll try to also remember to put it on the course page. I need to correct a drop there of that G. But this gives you the full picture, so you can kind of think about where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses, where do you see yourself as being very adept and very comfortable and on the edge, knowing things on the edge, and where are maybe you lagging behind or know that you have some challenges. And again, get some feedback on it will help enormously. Plan change, we're looking at that throughout this course, thinking about what's the current state, what is the desired future state, and how are you going to get from the current state to the future state, just in terms of thinking about team development and personal development. So what's the current path? What are drivers, things that are in the green that are pushing you? I don't know if I can do that. I've got the weather girl experience. Well, anyway, the green arrows, we're pointing up. Okay, so the green arrows versus the red arrows. The green arrows are keeping you moving toward the desired future state. The red arrows are pushing you back. So for example, good friends, family members. You may have some green arrows among them. You may have some red arrows among them. The amount of resources that you have to do your job, and the kinds of resources you have, the demands on you, and so forth. I mean, we could make a very, very long list very quickly, but things to think about in terms of change. So one thing with VUCA, 4IR, and trends is to reduce anxiety or pressure for the people who you work with and for yourself. So avoid surprises. These are kind of standard fare in terms of change. Ask for input. Ask for feedback, not only so that it helps reduce your anxiety because you're getting other people's, either their validation or they're raising issues that you might really want to think about, but also it keeps them engaged, and that helps to avoid surprises for them. Communicate up, down, across. Over the years when I've taught consulting as an elective, one of the things I say during the first class is and it's only partly in jest, but if you go into a client and you haven't quite figured out what the problem is and they're really pressing you for an answer, communication, it's going to be there no matter what. So you can always look at that. You can always improve that. Accepting and embracing risks and mistakes, and especially including your own as you continue to rise within organizations, as your education and your mindset and your global perspective increases, that you're still going to make mistakes despite all of that. So you've always got to be willing to accept those. Managing the timing of the changes, enlisting people who can help you become green arrow people that help you move forward. And again, these all on the idea of, okay, so how do you deal with the external environment and the demands and the turbulence of the external environment? One last section I want to talk about here in terms of personal development, again, I will go through this pretty quickly. If you want more, I will be glad to do a video or post some articles or whatever would be most useful. When we think about 4IR and VUCA, agility is a major, that's a major descriptor that comes up in terms of, how do we deal with it? Oh, well, become more agile, get faster, be more collaborative. But how do you really do that? Here are 4 really top suggestions. One is making peace with the fact that change is here to stay, knowing how you see the world, what truth is for you, what your values are, and so forth. Tapping in on that really helps you understand the lens that you use as you think about the challenges out there. Improving your critical thinking skills, and then building rapport and maintaining that rapport and teaming better in teams, in quotes. It's not always as a formal team, but collaborating better with other people. So sorry, this print's so small. Making peace with change, acknowledging things aren't going to be the same. It's a VUCA world, it's a 4IR world, whatever model you might want to add to that or that your organization adds to that. One of the issues is when you defend the status quo, when you talk about why or how things shouldn't change or aren't changing, if it's because the way things have always been is comfortable to you, is more comfortable to you, try to catch yourself and stop. And again, it's the idea, just kind of make peace with it, take it in. Meditation works really well, by the way. Know your own truth, so know what those values are, know what your objectives are. I'm going to talk about this in more detail as we get into the personal leadership development part of the course, and through the classes yet to come between now and then. Evaluating your own background influences, understanding your own perspectives, and being realistic about what you have to offer. So, moving away from opportunities never seems to feel right, particularly if you're a high achiever or a person who's really looking to get things done. But it actually frees you up to stay more in touch and more focused on the things you really want to do. So that's such an important point in terms of knowing what your own values added are. Improving critical thinking skills, holding your conclusions lightly and letting go of the need to be right. Those sort of go hand in hand. Looking and listening, I was talking about that in terms of perceptual acuity. Reading more, that one I should have done in huge bold print. Reading more, not just reading more, but reading beyond your expertise, reading beyond your responsibility. Read things that you just randomly pick up in the library or bookstore or find on Amazon, and it just catches your eye and you think, well, I'm not sure I'm interested. Read it anyway. You will definitely sharpen your mind on, even if the topic seems remote from what your focus is. Challenge the accuracy of what you take for granted, particularly when you're working cross-culturally. We tend to come from a dominant in any culture, we come from the dominant perspective. People come from the dominant perspective, and if you're interacting with people who are not part of the dominant perspective, you need to realize that and think about, gosh, the way I see the world is only one way of seeing the world, and then strive to see mistakes as part of learning, rather than evidence of somebody being stupid, incompetent, or careless. One of the things tying in on the reading and the mistakes as well, I was listening to a really fine podcast this morning, as a matter of fact, and the guest on it was talking about how he views mistakes and stretch, and the difficulty part, isn't just what he views, it's the reality. When you feel a difficulty, it's often because you're actually early on the learning curve. So you've got the opportunity, if you push through the difficulty, you have the opportunity of really moving up in terms of what you're learning, what you're practicing, what you're thinking, and so forth. So just bear that in mind. And the last thing on here that I'm striving to build and maintain rapport, be civil always. And as you may know, if you've looked at the bio, I don't think that my incivility in this particular version of the course, my incivility, straight up incivility and civility research is on there. But this is, this comes across, I've done more than a dozen years of research on workplace civility. Always be civil. Always, no matter with whom, no matter what the circumstance, it will pay off in the long run. And the payoff may be often by not making things worse, but that's still a payoff. So this is just a quick graphic here, and I will close on that. Payoffs that you reap from the power of civility, and I'll leave it there for you to take a look at. It's your interest, if your interest or inclinations head that way. Thanks for your attention.